So thank you for joining us today. This is a workshop on PowerNotes, which is a really fun tech tool that I hope you're all going to see and learn a little bit about today. My name is Kimberly, and I am one of the instructional services librarians at the University of Missouri. And I first came across PowerNotes through Christy and through the law school, actually, and saw it as a really useful tool for looking at the writing process through the lens of research. So as a researcher and as a librarian, I really liked that application. So I'm excited to share that with you.
And I'm Christy. I'm the Assistant Director of the Campus Writing Program, and I teach classes in the College of Ed and for the graduate school. And we are interested in PowerNotes because we're hosting a small PowerNotes pilot for writing intensive course instructors. And so once we started learning about what the instructors thought was useful, Kimberly and I agreed that bringing it to a larger audience could only make it even more useful for the University of Missouri. So that's why we're here. I am the writing expert on this call, by the way, and Kimberly is the everything else expert. So I'm going to defer to her on the rest of this thing.
That's very broad, but I appreciate the enthusiasm about it. So I wanted to also just point out that part of the reason we're doing this workshop is over the summer, the libraries did a survey about what interests people had for workshops. And there was a whole list of different things that faculty or students might be interested in. And one of the options we put was PowerNotes. And at the end of that survey, there was a little feedback form. And one of the main pieces of feedback we got were comments asking, what is PowerNotes? So that's kind of what we're going to address during this workshop. We're going to talk about what it is and why you might want to use it. So what the functionality is, and the purpose of it. And we'll do a little bit of a demo so you can see how it works on the back end as well. So that's our plan for today. And we will get into it a little bit more. So to jump in right away, what is it? PowerNotes is both a browser extension and a website. So it's an extension that lives kind of at the top of your web page and can be turned on and activated whenever you're doing research. It lets you quickly save information from any source, which means that as you're going through a PDF, as you're going through a website or any article, you can highlight the text or an image, and you can save that as a quote, you can save it as an image file or a graph, and have that automatically saved with the citation as well without ever leaving that document. It lets you organize on the fly. So as you are grabbing those quotes and grabbing those images and taking comments and annotating, you get the ability to put it in an outline that pops up on the side of your browser page. And so if you have an outline going for a paper where you know your topics, you can stick quotes directly into those subheadings. Or if you don't already have that going, as you're reading a paper, you can be like, well, this topic is really useful. I should probably talk about that in my paper. And you can create those headings as you go. It also, as I put on the slide, lets you track citations. I'm a librarian, I like citations, but I'm not a fan of always wasting my time writing them. I really appreciate tools that help me do that and make my job easier. And what I really like about using PowerNotes for that aspect is it lets you do it while you're in the PDF. And I always will grab quotes and grab ideas and be like, I'll remember where that came from. And I never do. So I'll be writing a paper. I'm like, I know I came across this really critical piece of information. It was great. I want to include it, but I can't remember where it came from. And so with using a tool like this, at the same time I'm grabbing that quote, at the same time I'm getting that idea, I also can keep track of where it came from. And the other thing I really like about this tool is you can share it. It doesn't have to just be something isolated. You can share with groups. So if you're a student working on a class assignment in a group, you can have that paper outline where everyone in your group is reading different articles and sending those quotes from the articles into your group outline. Or if you're a researcher and you are doing a systematic review, that's something that I do pretty frequently. It lets you export things into Word documents, but you can also export things into tables. So my colleagues and I will sometimes be reading different papers that we're adding into our systematic review. And as we're going, we'll grab the demographics and we'll grab the methodology and the objectives, and we'll put that in our table. And you might have 2 people touch every article, but not have all 4 of us touch every article. So I think it's really useful that way. But generically, putting all of that together, that's some of the minutia. Generically, it lets you bridge that gap between research and writing. So instead of writing a paper and then trying to find citations that fit, we really recommend that you do the research, you learn what's out there, and as you're researching, your project is developing and growing, and then you've already got the research in part to write the text around and write those transition sentences around. So you're letting the research guide your writing rather than the other way around. So that's kind of a very brief introduction. So based on that, I'm going to hand this over to Cindy. Or, I'm sorry, Christy. Wow, I need more coffee.
All right, I get that a lot. It's totally fine. I would like us to think about sort of why you're here. So I know a lot of you are here because you're working on research projects for in your lab or for a class, or your faculty members, if that's most of your job. And so think about your upcoming projects, class assignments, or instructional units, and consider one of these questions. And here's what I'd like you to do. I would like you to type one of the answers in chat, but don't hit enter yet. So we're gonna do that game where you're gonna wait until I say to hit enter, and then it'll populate really fast, and then we can read it then. Otherwise, with such a large group, it becomes a challenge to keep up with the chat. So think about what's going on in your classes and research world and answer one of these questions. Where might the PowerNotes tool be useful? So what particular part of what project do you think that this kind of tool that Kimberly just discussed could be useful? Or answer this question. What specifically are you wanting to learn about this tool? Have you already poked around in it a little bit? And do you have some questions, or are you thinking this might be really great for one particular thing, right? So I'm going to give you 45 seconds, and I'd love for you to answer in chat, but don't hit enter one of these questions. All right, start now.
And also for this exercise, just don't worry about sentence structure or being grammatically correct, just whatever comes to mind.
Yes, this is a generative process of just gathering ideas. Keep writing for 15 more seconds. All right, on my count of 3, hit enter. 1, 2, 3. It's so fun to watch it populate. I love seeing that. Then you can scroll back up. So we'll let everyone enter it, and then we'll just kind of scroll through here, and Kimberly and I will see what people are most interested in. Oh, great question, Kimberly, about how it's different from like Mendeley or Prisma. So what does it do differently? I think that's a great question. I love Tori's point about limiting distractions from other pages. That's great. So you kind of have one page open and you're working within that page.
Keeping everything organized. Diane asks if it's free and can be used from anywhere. And we are going to discuss that. There is a free version. There is a paid version. Right now, we are trialing the paid version, but it is free for you. And even if MU loses access, there is still a free version that's accessible. And we'll dig a little bit more into that as well. A couple people saying that they're learning how to use a few tools that will be good practices down the road for grant proposals and dissertations, rather than once you're halfway into the project, realize you should have a tool like that. I think that's a good point. You were asking how it is different from things like Mendeley and Prisma. Was that the question, Christy?
It was.
So Mendeley is a citation management tool, which is really great for organizing all of the papers that you have out there. So if I have 100 papers that I'm working on for a systematic review and I'm trying to keep them organized, it's a really great tool for using that. And it doesn't necessarily grab the individual citations, but it will write your bibliography for you all at once. So I really do recommend using both, because citation management tools are wonderful, like Mendeley and Zotero are wonderful for that big level article management. PowerNotes is more the individual quote management and organization of the paper itself. So one of them is like, this is how we organize our bibliography and we keep track of all the different papers we've used. And the other one is, here are our quotes and we're organizing them in an outline for a specific paper.
And one more, that's a great answer. Thank you. And one more thing before we go on, I wanted to say that we'll also talk about applications to teaching classes. So I know that there are a few of you here that are thinking about using this in your classes and your instructors. We'll talk about that at the end. And finally, I saw lots of people say this will help me write more quickly. And I absolutely agree. I read 4 papers and took notes on them over my lunch break. That normally would take me like half of a morning. And so I think this idea of being focused and quick is a really great thing to take into the demo.
Yes, and I did want to address that Prisma thing really quickly, because the comment mentioned we talked about that in another workshop on literature reviews. And Prisma isn't a tool, it's a standard. So if you're writing a systematic review or a meta-analysis, Prisma is the standard you would use to format your paper and then also to keep track. But it's not a tool so much as it is like a required, here's how you prove you were a credible researcher. So slightly different on that end, but I like all of these ideas. I did want to jump in and talk about a couple others. Oh, nope, staying on the slide, a couple others that came up. One thing that we've learned from PowerNotes is that it's used equally between both faculty members and students, but it's kind of used in different ways. So faculty members tend to use it more for researching and for writing those systematic reviews, writing papers, that background piece of any article. And students tend to use it for creating study guides for class, because you can have those headings and then you can add lecture notes and quotes from articles that are reading assignments and other things that come up in lab. So it can be used in lots of different formats. So just as an idea, there are ways to teach annotating, but also do annotating yourself. There are ways to export for an article you're writing, but also export for a study guide that you share with a group. So we're going to start demoing some of that. And I'm going to back out of the slide deck and actually go to the PowerNotes website itself. I mentioned that PowerNotes is both a browser extension and a website. So to jump in, we're going to talk about how you would go ahead and get this browser extension. If you go to powernotes.com and you have never downloaded or looked at it before, this is the page you should see. I logged out so that you would be able to kind of see what it looks like without being a current member. And the first thing you'd want to do is add this browser extension. It's a Chrome extension. It also exists on Firefox, but it works much better in Chrome. So I highly recommend using Chrome for this and not Firefox. And they're working on Internet Explorer, but it's not there yet, or Safari. So Chrome is going to be your main home for this, and you would upload it. You will need to create a login at that point. And since free access is through the university, you want to make sure and sign up with your university email. And we have checked with our contact at PowerNotes, and all of the different endings for Mizzou emails work. So if you're health.missouri.edu, mail.missouri.edu, UM system, all of those alternate versions of email, they all should work for this. But make sure you do log in with your MU email. And as I mentioned, there is a free version and there is a paid for version. Right now, MU has the paid for version. And that means that you have an unlimited number of projects. And we're going to take a look at what projects are and what they mean. The free version, you still have access, but you only get to use a single project at a time. So if you have multiple papers going on, then it wouldn't necessarily work. However, everything that you create during our trial does stay yours. You don't lose access. We did check with that. You don't lose access after the trial is over. So create a ton of projects now, and then you'll have extra ones for later, if just in case. But yes, you will always have at least access to one free project at any given point in time. So I'm going to go ahead and go through what it looks like if you're logging in. I do have an account set up with my Mizzou email address. And let's make sure I remember my login. Success. Okay. So there's two different pieces to the website. We have the project page. This is where my projects live. But if you hit the question mark, it's also going to direct you to the PowerNotes blog. And I want to point this out because we're doing a demo here, but they also have a number of really great video tutorials on the blog site. So if you're looking for just like a quick 1 minute or 2 minute YouTube video on how to do a specific task, like how to save an image, you know, we talked about it in this presentation, but rather than go through this whole half-an-hour deal, you want to just figure out how do I save images? There's a little quick video that can walk you through those steps. So do keep in mind the question mark on the PowerNotes project page is going to take you to those videos. I think they're really helpful and can answer some of your questions right away. The other way to get in contact is if you go down here to the very bottom of the page, there is a contact form, and this is the PowerNotes feedback form. So this would redirect any questions or comments. I mean, you can talk to me about them, but if you're running into a consistent issue, you can let me know, but you can also let the PowerNotes team themselves know through this form, and they'll help address your issue and make sure any problems get resolved quickly. So you've got both of those in your back pocket. So keep that in mind. I have pulled up a couple different options for us to play around with here while demoing PowerNotes. Right now, I have it turned off. Once you've installed it as a browser extension, it should show up at the top of your page here as a little P. And when it's turned on, which mine is off right now, since I had logged out before, let me log back in here as well. Because again, it's a website and a browser extension. So I had logged out previously. I can't talk and type at the same time. Here we go. And since I had already loaded this page and then logged out, that's what happened. Okay, so I am now logged in. You can turn this on and off. And you'll notice as I do that, I get that little yellow circle popping up at the bottom of my page. And so when that yellow circle is there, PowerNotes is on, and I have projects that I can add to. Now I'm going to add a project because we don't need to work in one of the projects I already got going. So you can create, again, right now, you can create as many projects as you want. So I'm going to create a demo project. And let me, sorry, the little video thing for Zoom was on the bottom, overlapping the create button. So we're going to create this project. Now I have a new project outline. It automatically populates with a few outline topics. I've got background, I've got new topics. I can rename these. Background is pretty common because many academic articles start with that background or that literature review section. So you might say like, okay, well, instead of background, I want to talk about, this is an article I pulled up on tech tools. So that's going to be one of my topics. And then I don't know what else I'm going to find. So I'm just going to leave that open for now. And I'm going to minimize that little circle because I'm reading an article and I want to see what the article has to say rather than see that outline all the time. But as I'm reading this article, when I come across things that I really am interested in, I think that I should save them. So here we're talking about equity. And I wanted to point this out. This is something I've run into. You'll notice when I highlight it, nothing happens. This is because I've turned PowerNotes on and off and on and off. When I turn it off, it sometimes needs you to refresh the article itself. And I was using EBSCO, so it logged me out, which is lovely. Okay, let me jump back and get that article again. Tech tools for writing. EBSCO has a 5-minute logout. So that's what happened. I was trying to be proactive and pull up an article ahead of time, but our vendors didn't want to play nicely with that. So I'm just going to go ahead and get that PDF again for us now. Okay, here we go. There's our PDF. I'm opening it. So if the article has timed out, PowerNotes will not work. That is what you were seeing before, and that's okay. But now that I'm in the article and it's not timed out, when I highlight anything, it gives me this little drop-down list. And you can see those are the topics that I had already picked and put in my demo. So I could say, okay, this is really useful. Obviously, March 2020, there was a pretty big change switching to tech tools. So I think that's important. And I want to add that into my outline here. This is a quote that I want. When I add it to my outline, it pops up a little box that lets me take notes and annotate. So I could say like, oh, this is about the pandemic. So this would go and talk about the pandemic. And there's a little citation. So I can confirm that it's grabbed the correct citation in case you're worried that it might not, and then click done. Now, when I open up PowerNotes, my quote is right there. It's grabbed the citation for me. If I go to confirm that citation, it does tell you a little bit more in the source notes. And so you do have that all ready to go there. I'm going to make that smaller again. And as you go through an article, you would just highlight anything that you find to be particularly useful and then add it into your paper. So I might, again, I'm just using this as a demo. These aren't actually things that maybe I would save for a paper, but you could say, okay, over 1/8 of respondents use graphic design tools, Canva. That's pretty cool to know. I probably want that under my tech tools thing. So I'm going to add that too, and it's there now. And again, you can add all of these things, which I think is pretty useful. You also can capture images. Now, if you're on a website, you can capture the image by right-clicking just like you would if you were saving it to your computer. But if you're in a PDF, the PDF doesn't actually recognize that this is an image file. So PowerNotes instead has the option of letting you screen capture. So you can take a screenshot and you can use the entire screen, or you can drag and drop and say, these are the pieces I want. I really just want this section here. I want this graph. And it's the same thing. I can add it to anything here. I'm going to add that to my tech tools as well. And it lets me take comments. It's going to take the citation. Whoop. My mouse has been being a little bit weird, but now you can see that in addition to those 2 quotes I've pulled, I also have that graphic image here. So I think that's really neat. The other thing up here, so you did see I used this button to take the screenshot. The other option here is to add a bookmark. If this is an article you think you want to come back to again and again and again, and not just grab the quotes from, you can bookmark the article itself, and the project outline will hold that and keep it and save that too. Okay, So that's kind of using it in an article. You would obviously be jumping around between different articles and not just use one for any good paper, but for the point of an example, I think looking at one is fine. I also wanted to show that it can be used on websites too. So over here, we're using a PDF that's from the library's archive. Our electronic resources librarian, Rhonda Whithouse, worked with PowerNotes to make sure that all of the articles that our libraries have are also going to work and merge with PowerNotes. So any PDF you're in, this should work in, but it also does work with any web page that you're on. So if you were coming to this particular page and you also wanted, a particular quote from here, same thing, it works the same way. The only difference is, again, if you want an image, you could use that screen capture, but you could also right click and save the image as an image that way too. And once these are in here, you can add free-form notes too. So if you're like, oh, well, these two quotes really talk well to each other, but I want a transition sentence between them, I can add and say, this is my transition sentence. I can't type and talk. Transition sentence. There we go. And then I have my transition sentence there. So you'll notice though that it's showing up at the top. They show up in order, and that's just a thing that's going to be in the outline. You can move them, however, on the website. So we're going to jump over now to the PowerNotes workbook. Oh, I've already got that open over here. And here's my demo, the one that we've been looking at as we've been going. So if I open up the demo page, now you can see all of those things that I've pulled already. You can see the two quotes, the graphic, and the transition sentences. At this point, I have the option of dragging these around, kind of like they're index cards. If I wrote everything else on index cards and I wanted to shuffle things around and say like, oh, well, this quote should go over here and that quote should go over there, I can do that by dragging and dropping these, which I think is pretty cool. All of it's saved again. And then the little dots that you see on the corner of each card also let you move the cards around. So if you have a really big project and you've got a ton of these, and so dragging and dropping and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, you can just move it to a different section. You can also copy it either to a different section or to a different project. And I like this aspect because sometimes I'm working on multiple projects that are kind of similar in nature. Like maybe I'm working on one paper that looks at how tech tools address inequality. And maybe I'm looking at another paper that's just reviewing tech tools that people use during the pandemic. So they're separate papers, but there's overlap. So I might say, okay, this tech tool section is good for the project here, but I also want it to be in my other project. I can send that entire section and copy that entire section over to another one of my projects. So I can copy either the individual quote to a different topic or to a different paper, and I can copy the whole section as well over. So again, if you're working on a dissertation, but you also have a class where you're doing something small about that dissertation, you can create, your paper for the class, but then you can also copy the work you've already done over to your dissertation project. So you've got it all in one place. And I think that saves a bit of time, bit of effort. And again, it does capture the quote and it captures the citations as well. At this point, you can also add comments. So I could say, oh, the reason I grabbed this quote was for X, Y, and Z, and this works well with, whatever John Smith wrote. This goes with John Smith's argument or whatever.
Really quick question about that while you have this particular screen up that just came in the chat. Does it show the page number? I had that same question when I was trying to export earlier. I had the same question twice.
No. I don't see the citation you see there does have the title of the journal, but it doesn't look like it has the page number. So maybe that's something you would want to grab as well. When you are in any of these, you can edit the citations. So you could say, as you're putting it in, that this is page, we can see this page 431, but that's, you know what, it might not have grabbed this one for me because this one, I'm looking at a very new article, June 2021. This is a preprint. So this hasn't actually been printed in the journal yet. So right now those pages are the electronic access pages, but they're not necessarily what the page numbers will be when it's published in the print journal. So
why don't I pull up an older one? I think I have one in my PowerNotes and see if it pulls the page number, and I'll get back to you all. How about that?
Yes, I haven't noticed the page number, so that might be something to take notes on still. Yes, good question. Thank you for adding that. And it looks like something else came up in the chat. And nope, that was the one in the chat. Okay, page number does not see that. Right. So I do think maybe that is a good thing to write in the comments or to add to the citation. You can edit the citations when you go in. It's grabbing it, but it grabs the basic bibliographic citation and not what you would use for the in-text. So yeah, good point there. So that's kind of the generic how-to. There are a couple other pieces that go along with this. And one of those is the collaboration feature. So you can see up at the very top at the beginning of the project that you have the option of sharing. And sharing has two different features. One is a commenter. So you could share this with, if you're writing your dissertation, you could share this with an advisor and ask them for comments. So they wouldn't be able to add quotes or add things into the project, but they could write comments about quotes, or they could add notes. So those little note cards, they could add a note card saying like, oh, you need to have another source talking about aspect X, Y, and Z. So that's the commenter feature. The editor feature would be someone who had the exact same privileges and rights in the project. So again, if you were doing a group project for class, you could create this and then have all of your friends who are also doing the project with you be editors, so that each of you could be adding quotes to the different sections of the outline and adding comments and adding all of the annotations and pieces that you would need. So that's the sharing part. The export part gives you a couple options. One is a Word document. And if you export as a Word document, it's going to grab those headings that you have as well. So you'll have kind of your subheadings and your outline already set to go with your quotes, and then you just write the paper around it. But it also lets you export to an Excel sheet. The source topic is the one that I typically use when I mentioned systematic reviews. So when you do that table, it'll pull the sources out on the left column, and then I would have my headings, instead of having like paragraph headings or subheadings, those would be the columns of my chart. So instead of tech tools here, I'd have like demographics or methodology, outcomes would be maybe some of my headings. And so it would pull the sources, and then it would fill in the table based on my headings as well, which I think is a pretty useful aspect. Since I do a lot of systematic reviews, I appreciate that this exports it directly into an Excel spreadsheet for me. And the last icon you see there is time management. This one I think is a little bit more useful for the instruction side of things, and Christy's going to talk about that a bit when she talks about using this in classes. But it lets you know how much time you have spent on a particular project working on it. And the reason this is useful for instruction is if you assign a group project, you can see how long each of the group members has been in the project and has been working on it and has had it open. Not that time directly correlates to effort, because it doesn't, but it's just one way to take a look at it. It does time out. So you couldn't have a student that like opened up the web page and went to go watch the Super Bowl. After a couple minutes, it does time out. So you can get a more realistic idea of how long somebody's been involved in the project. So again, that's just a little something. If that were to happen, it does require anyone who's sharing it to agree to have that time management piece on and seen. If one member doesn't agree, then it doesn't get seen. So as an instructor, the instructor would have to be given permission by the members of the group to see that time management piece. Okay, so those are some of the very, very basics of how to use this particular tool. And I am going to close this out and pass it back over to Christy to talk about some other applications.
Actually, can you keep it up, because I accidentally closed it as I was looking in my PowerNotes. So if you don't mind.
I don't. Let me go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry, best laid plans of mice and men and all. So as you can see, it's a pretty robust program. It has a few little technical weirdnesses that you can get around pretty easily. But what I really like about it is that there are so many instruction applications for any level of class, whether it's a writing class or just a class with a writing component. The first instruction application that I think is powerful is teaching students how to sort of summarize and quote and paraphrase. And the powerful part of this is that when you're teaching students how to paraphrase, we know this is a challenge, right? It's a hard thing to do for all of us grad students and faculty and undergraduates alike. The cool thing about PowerNotes is that it pulls the original language. So what you might ask students to do is highlight a quote that they are going to paraphrase, and then in the comment button, or when you highlight it and the comment bubble pops up, you can have students type their paraphrase there. And then when they submitted that to you as an instructor, it would have the original text next to the paraphrase. This also helps students understand the last step of paraphrasing, which is you always have to go back to the original language to make sure that both you're using your own words and that you've captured the intent of the original piece. And so I think that this is a great way to do that, to help them see it side by side. Also, summary is a challenge, and sometimes you can see if they captured all the main ideas this way. It also really helps encourage student engagement with readings. And so we don't want students just to mindlessly highlight things, right? Kimberly jokes all the time that my #1 soapbox is that highlighting is a passive act. You don't learn anything when you're highlighting. You're literally just highlighting words. Sometimes you're thinking about what you're eating for dinner, right? And so we want students to be able to comment on the readings and rather than, for example, maybe writing a reading response or an annotated bibliography, those can seem insurmountable. They can be a lot to grade. This could be a really generative way for students to engage with the readings, and they could download their PowerNotes outline and submit that to you instead of a longer, more involved assignment. And it would be quicker, I think, for everyone. And they'd actually have to get in the text and encourage or do some reading in detail in that way. This is also a great tool to teach annotation. And so in doing so, that we can really model what talking back to the text looks like. I think a lot about the claim, evidence, reasoning structure that's so powerful in STEM writing. And the reasoning piece is really tough. So if we teach students to annotate within the text, and perhaps in those boxes that pop up, they write the reasoning that they would use to justify why that piece of evidence fits their claim, that could be a really powerful way for them to learn how to talk back to the text rather than just passively take the text in. Next slide, please. You can just click, there you go. There are so many applications, but here are 2 more, and then we'll move on to getting your questions and comments. This would be a great way to create a class study guide. So we did learn that the share feature is really robust. Students can either share a study guide and other people can view it, or you can actually make a group editors on the same document. And so students could look through their own class notes, the textbook, articles, and create a group outline or a group study guide where they all have to contribute to it. And the neat thing about PowerNotes is that it shows who contributed on that group shared document of whatever sort. So students could create an outline together. It'd be great for group writing of papers. It'd be excellent to create a study guide from all of the different class materials. As long as you can make it into a PDF and the PDF is readable as text and not an image, you can use this to do the highlighting. People have asked us the difference between Hypothesis and PowerNotes. So you might know that Hypothesis is another program that is integrated with Canvas at the university right now. They did a demo pilot of that last year and decided to go ahead and purchase it. The difference is that Hypothesis is really a social reading tool. So if you in your classes wanted to assign one article for multiple students to read and you wanted to grade that as an assignment, Hypothesis is the right tool for that job. PowerNotes is much more powerful as an individual piece or a very small group. It's not integrated into Canvas as of right now, and so you do have to send students to an external tool, but it's also the one that helps reproduce that really powerful way of researching with taking note cards and writing your quotes on note cards and moving them around. So we know that it supports the research process in a different way than Hypothesis supports the social reading process. Kimberly, I pass it back over to you.
Yes, so the other piece that I wanted to just add here is that PowerNotes is still partially in development. It was used for a long time and created by law libraries and law schools to create outlines for legal briefs, legal briefs. Again, I didn't really get coffee this morning, so I'm just now catching up. But to make legal briefs and outlines for studying for things like the bar. So they've expanded now and it's being used much more interdisciplinarily. But as part of that, they're making a lot of changes and updating it. And our contact at PowerNotes has been incredibly open to feedback and to adding things based on the feedback that they're getting. So one of the things that they added just recently as of the end of August was that citation piece, because before it was grabbing the URL, but not the citation in MLA or APA format. I didn't show you this, but you can change the format style that it's grabbing. And so they want to hear feedback. So that feedback button or that contact us link that I showed you at the very bottom of the project page is how you would give suggestions if there's anything that you think should be added or that would make this tool even more robust. So a couple of things coming down the pipeline based on feedback that they've gotten is that they are adding this into LMS systems. So pretty soon it should be available in Canvas. So it's not yet, but as of next semester it will be. or at least that is what we're hearing is coming down the pipe. There's also going to be a tab for evaluation criteria. So if instructors wanted to add in that piece where any article that is examined could also be checked against like a checklist for validity and for credibility. Things like the CRAP test, where we look at authority and where material came from, that's going to be added in as well. And of course, that social annotation piece that Christy mentioned, hypothesis is really better for that at the moment, but they're looking at adding a bit more of availability of that. So the point of all of this is there's new things coming. It's going to continue to be developed as a tool, and they are looking for feedback on ways to develop it, and everything that we've suggested they've been really open to adding and have already started to implement. So yeah, it's a fun tool. I think it's a pretty quick learning curve, and I think it saves a lot of time and effort turning that research into writing. So that is our presentation. We would love to answer any questions that you might have, and I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen for that.